Good afternoon. It's great that so many have joined us today, and a very warm welcome to the Northern Ireland Annual Lecture. This year we're focusing on strategies for slowing climate change through smarter water management. I'm Beverly Ferrara and I'm the chair of today's event. As the European representative for the Water Council, which is a US-based water tech hub, I don't often get the opportunity to shine a spotlight in Northern Ireland, so I'm especially pleased to be here today. Of course, the climate emergency affects all of us, and in my role, I get to meet people working on environmental challenges on both sides of the Atlantic. And I'm fascinated by the scale and the ingenuity of their solutions, from water recycling for individual homes to megacity challenges such as flooding, to these brilliant new AI technologies that are driving resilient, sustainable, and cost-effective changes to water management systems. So I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to be involved in water management. So thanks to Dennis Murphy of Eneco, Digital Leaders Ambassador for Northern Ireland, for hosting this event and for choosing water and the climate as its theme. Today's session is a fantastic opportunity to learn from experts here in Northern Ireland and from Scotland, working at the intersection of climate and environment, net zero initiatives and digital technologies. As we'll hear from Alistair Jinks, Director of Business Services at Northern Ireland Water, the water industry is at the forefront of addressing climate change and at the heart of the post-COVID green recovery. Afterwards, we'll have an expert panel to explore how Net Zero 2050 provides a framework to challenge and guide us as we redesign our future. So it promises to be an enlightening afternoon, and let's get started. I'd like to invite Alistair to come on stage to share how Northern Ireland Water is addressing the challenges and the opportunities of tomorrow.
Hi there, Beverly. Hopefully everybody can now see me. And new as I am to this, I think I'll be able to pull up my slides and begin my presentation. So hopefully everybody can see the covering slide. Firstly, let me just say it's a fantastic opportunity to be here with you all today to talk about some of the emerging thinking from Northern Ireland Water. And I think, I hope you feel at the end the opportunity that exists for the water industry in most of the developed world to be able to play a really major part in helping to address the climate emergency. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the term world class for a moment, because that's something that we've embraced in the course of the last 2 or 3 years as a challenge. We at Northern Ireland Water want to be a world class utility. And we've been trying to understand more about what's important in what characterizes a world class organization. And 3 of the themes that come across are collaboration, innovation, and moving at pace. And for us, those are really big challenges. So I don't want to pretend that we've conquered all of them, far from it. Collaboration isn't just about internal collaboration, although that's really important because all large organizations have silos. It's also about collaborating beyond your boundaries with other organizations, innovating in collaboration as well as within your own organization, and moving at pace. And I think today what you'll hear, I hope, is a lot about integrated ideas. None of them in themselves are necessarily technology driven in a highly innovative way, but it's the integration of those ideas that I believe are very powerful. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about how we at Northern Ireland Water believe we have a pivotal role in enabling Northern Ireland to create a self-sufficiency in low-cost renewable energy. And I want you to pause on that with me for a moment and just think about how incredible that statement is, because throughout my life, we've always imported all of our energy requirements, and that has a huge drag on our economy. So to be able just to talk about creating a self-sufficiency in renewable energy is quite incredible and holds huge potential. But I want to stress the term low cost, because an expensive renewable energy system may bring benefits, but it'll be by a long way suboptimal. The second part of my presentation, the second theme of my presentation today, is going to be about how that world-leading innovation that can drive the transformation of our energy system here at home can also accelerate the pace at which we address major wastewater constraint. And that constraint's a reflection of our failure as a society to invest in the water infrastructure that is so important in a first world country. And as a consequence, we've got 20 years of backlogged investment to make up for. 20 years. Over 100 towns and cities in Northern Ireland are now constrained in the sewage system because the pipes are choked, or at the works that treat the waste. That, in simple terms, means that no new housing, be it social housing or private housing in those towns, or commercial development can connect to our wastewater system, and that clearly has adverse consequences for our economy. So it's a green growth story throughout. I hope you'll see it come together. So one of the things I pick up from people is, you know, I've heard David Attenborough, I've heard Greta, I've heard lots of reports, I've seen the news, I read it in the paper. Isn't it time that we really got on and started to address the climate emergency? It's time to get stuff done. And at Northern Ireland Water, 67% of our operational carbon is electricity. So we've begun to really focus in on what are we going to do about electricity, just like the UK water industry more widely. And energy, of course, is a big expense for us because we're the biggest user of energy, electricity in particular, in Northern Ireland. We spend over £30 million a year on electricity alone. So whatever route we choose to decarbonise, we need to find a route that uses low-cost green energy. So I'm going to say today that Northern Ireland Water can help Northern Ireland to address three big challenges that we have if we want to adopt a self-sufficiency in renewable energy as the main driver for our system here at home. The first is, what are we going to do about all that surplus wind generation capacity that we have, particularly at night time? I'm going to come on and talk about that in just a moment. The second is, how can we supply the demand for electricity, which is going to grow from customers as they shift away from fossil fuel use, diesel for cars, and move towards away from home heating oil as well, and use more and more electricity. And then the third is, how are we going to deal with the issue of intermittency, which is a characteristic that we're all familiar with the increasing use of renewables. And Northern Ireland Water has a pivotal role in regard to all three. So let's deal with the first one. 85% of our renewable energy comes from wind, and that's likely to be the case as we go forward. So we're very, very well endowed with fantastic sources of wind for generating renewable electricity on land and as yet untapped offshore, some of the very best in Europe. So if we think about that and we think about what we've learned so far and extrapolate that into the future, what's clear is that those wind turbines are increasingly being switched off at night. And that's because the demand for electricity at night time is very low. Here in Northern Ireland, particularly so. And the reason for that is we don't have underlying big consumers in industry for electricity. So investors are pausing and asking, is Northern Ireland a good place to invest in when it comes to wind farm development? How are we going to recover our costs and make a margin if at night the machines are switched off? Of course, we have the option of paying a subsidy and pushing up everybody's electricity bill, or alternatively, we can find a way to use that surplus generating capacity. And we believe that points to energy storage, and in particular to electrolysis, which many of you will know produces hydrogen. And we believe that green hydrogen, To quote from a recent report in Bloomberg, is the energy, green energy, that reaches the parts of our society that green electricity will not reach. And a good example of that is public transport. So the answer overall, 9 times out of 10, is going to be green electricity, but in some places it won't do the trick. And we think, as you can see from the illustration on the right, there are some great opportunities, indeed essential places where we need to start thinking about using that green hydrogen. Our agri-food sector, which is really important to our economy, is hauled out of Northern Ireland and much of the packaging into Northern Ireland on HGVs. And those diesel-fired lorries just aren't going to be a sustainable option for the future. So why is Northern Ireland Water interested in hydrogen? It seems a little incredible, but it's which is normally vented, which is of particular interest to us. 99.9 times out of 100, the oxygen is vented in the electrolysis process of splitting water into H2 and oxygen. And the reason it's important to us is because water utilities are our society's only major user of oxygen. And if we use it in an appropriate way to augment our wastewater treatment process, evidence from different parts of the world suggests that that can help the bugs to eat the bugs faster. And that means you get a better throughput, and that means you get an opportunity to increase your capacity. And that clearly helps us to think differently about how we could address the wastewater constraints that I talked about at the top of the slides. And the results so far from our pilot at Kinniger near Hollywood are encouraging. We're using a small electrolyzer there, but nevertheless, we're looking at the results very carefully and thinking this is a positive set so far. And the 1 megawatt, which some of you will have read about, the electrolyzer arrives in Belfast in the autumn of this year, and we plan to demonstrate its use and success with oxygen at that time. But electrolyzers in themselves can't be justified as an investment just because of the oxygen. There have to be other benefits that accrue. And what we are convinced of is that by running them at night and storing oxygen as well as hydrogen that's produced through the electrolysis process gives us the opportunity to be able to help alleviate electricity network constraints. In other words, our big consuming assets, the Belfast Wastewater Treatment Works alone consumes something of the order of £3.5 million worth of electricity every year, will be able to very largely drop its requirement during the day by drawing on these oxygen storage tanks, have accumulated sufficient oxygen to run the plant during certain parts of the day, and therefore allow the electricity to flow through to other customers. The alternative to that may be that around Northern Ireland, more poles, more wires, more substations need to be built out. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it adds up to a huge amount of money. Strengthening the network is very expensive, and it will push our bills up. And of course, green hydrogen produced from this process can fuel our public transport system. And we can do this on a Northern Ireland Water site because those sites already exist. They already have large electricity grid connections, which are difficult to obtain and very expensive. And Northern Ireland Water itself has a lot of buying power when it comes to electricity. So the average price per unit for electricity is lower with Northern Ireland Water than with others. So before I leave this slide, I think an important point here towards the bottom is all of this is good, but it's also good in another way. Innovative thinking helps to provide Northern Ireland per se with a pathway to be a leader in green hydrogen. I'm not always sure exactly where those economic opportunities will emerge, but I'm really confident that if we approach them positively, not passively, we will find that the IP and the know-how that we establish through this process becomes commercially valuable. The second question that I've posed, that I challenge perhaps that I posed is, how can Northern Ireland Water help to make sure that we supply electricity affordably. Because as more and more electricity is needed by customers, then, as I mentioned, system strengthening becomes very, very expensive. So we don't want to build another electricity system, which we couldn't afford to do. We need to think a little bit outside the box. And of course, we're, as I mentioned, our biggest electricity user. We have 3,000 widely dispersed and connected sites. That's unique to Northern Ireland Water. And we're here for the long term. I know it sounds silly, but a lot of private sector companies regrettably aren't. They're here for a period and they're gone. So it makes sense to invest in Northern Ireland Water. And what we can offer is the opportunity to be able to help NIEN by reducing demand at our major sites. We can flex our consumption profile, and we can do that in a controlled way. We can also anticipate that in the future, when the wind doesn't blow as strongly on one of those cold, still days as people would like it to blow to power the turbines, and there isn't enough electricity, we can help NIEN to intelligently control how they share out what electricity is available. And we can do that by not only coming offline, but we can also potentially use our battery storage and hydrogen assets of the future to generate electricity that keeps not only our critical assets going, but provides that bit more power area. We can address intermittency by helping to use our existing assets to deploy batteries around the province. Sometimes when I say this internally, people have said to me, well, you know, that's not really our business, is it? Why doesn't a private energy company do that? And my answer is simple. The people of Northern Ireland, the water customers, are also the same people who are electricity customers. And they've already paid for those sites, those connections, and the large generators that we have on 90 of those sites across Northern Ireland. So as water customers, if they've already paid for it, why should they pay again to duplicate those expensive assets? Why shouldn't they enjoy a lower cost electricity bill as a result of harnessing them? And in the future, as I say, our diesel generators will need to be replaced in any event, perhaps with large batteries or perhaps with hybrid battery H2 generators. It's the low cost, common sense option. Very briefly, I'm tempted to say all roads lead back to Rome, because when you start thinking about the water company and how it can help in so many different ways to decarbonize our energy system, you can very quickly find yourself recognizing that all that water could be enormously helpful when it comes to those spells when there isn't all of the generating capacity that we would like from renewables in the future. So what better way than to use water stored at height to be dropped onto a turbine as part of the backup solution that we're going to need for the future. It's not a new idea, but I thought I'd mention it because if we're going to make that sort of investment, we need to start thinking about it and building it now, not just with existing assets, but with the assets that have been made redundant over the years, all those reservoirs that are sitting that are not being used. So at this stage, what's underpinning all of this? Data and digital technology is the critical enabler. You know, for many years, all that Northern Ireland Water had to do with the electricity system in terms of helping it was do a bit of peak lopping. That's where our generators via an aggregator are controlled such that when there's a demand for electricity that can't be met by a fossil fuel station in a particular area, then there's a bit of peak lopping done. Our generators are switched on, we drop off the grid in terms of taking a supply, and that allows people in the area around that particular asset to be able to stay in supply with electricity. But the future market is going to be so much more dynamic. It's going to be quite incredible. There will be a lot of variables. We need to get ready for that. And the one that always sparks my imagination is the weather, because as we get better at weather forecasting, we can see the next day what will happen if it isn't going to be as windy or as sunny, or if it's going to be a fantastic day for wind. And that means that the market will be asked through various signals to respond to questions like, do you want to buy up some really low-cost electricity and store it? Do you want to offer us the ability to be able to generate and export some of that energy that you're capable of doing? And in anticipation of that, in part, we're setting up an intelligent operations centre. It's drawing on high resolution data to feed dashboards to empower decisions related to that. And we're drawing heavily on the fact that as an organisation, we have a high level of digital capability to provide the two-way interaction that's necessary between the IOC and all those remote sites to be able to optimise our response. And of course, we can harness our production line assets as well. All those pumps and blowers, and they're all around Northern Ireland. But Kieran, a colleague and friend who's at the session today and is on the panel, has been working really hard to take what was an archaic situation where all we could see was whether they were switched on or off, to one where we are hugely better informed about the potential of those assets to play a part in providing flexibility to those managing the network. And then there's one last big opportunity that I think underpins, again, thought leadership in this space, which is around how can we optimize, and nobody else in the world is doing this, how can we optimize the mix of storage and generating assets at various Northern Ireland Water locations to be able to play a really meaningful part. So if you think about it for a moment, water organizations are going to need batteries at those locations. They're going to need to build out, as many of them are, some generating capacity in the form of solar, for example. They're going to have EVs moving in and out, batteries on wheels. How do we optimize all of those to know that they're playing a part, along with the flexibility of the asset itself, to be able to help the grid and deliver an income for Northern Ireland Water, which ultimately lowers the costs to the taxpayer, to water customers. So, as we draw to a close, I believe Northern Ireland Water and Northern Ireland can be world leading in this space. And the reason for once is largely based on the fact that we're small. Small usually means it's a big disadvantage. But on this occasion, there's one water company, one owner of the wires, and a utility regulator, one utility regulator who oversees both. We only have a handful of capable organisations that need to get together in one room, break down the formality, form a plan, start delivering, build momentum, and grow further opportunities. And I think we're uniquely placed as a government-owned public health utility to play a part in acting as a pathfinder. So my last slide, Northern Ireland Water, I hope you can see from what I've said today, can do several things. Firstly, it can play a pivotal role in helping facilitate the next wave of wind farm investment by 2030. Secondly, it can help keep the costs of supplying electricity low. And thirdly, it can play a really important part in intermittency, whether that's short-term or long-term. And on the long-term front, it's worth mentioning Ireland North and South doesn't have nuclear power. So backing up a renewable system is a really important characteristic of what we need going forward. And at the same time as doing that, we can lower costs for our water organisation and for electricity customers by doing the things that I've talked about earlier and increasing the pace at which we alleviate wastewater constraint through realigning our investment programme. I hope I've picked a few boxes for you. Thanks for listening. And I think now it's back to Beverly and over to Simon.
It is. Thanks, Alistair. I love your getting stuff done approach. It's clear that the real work of saving the planet is being done in the trenches. Lots of food for thought there for Simon. For me, not least, that Northern Ireland Water is taking a leading role in building cross-sector momentum that's needed to create a more future. And we'll move on now to explore some of the themes that you highlighted in your talk. And for that, I'd like to introduce our panel. Drawn from the worlds of water, technology and academia, welcome Neil Kitching, who is the low carbon expert at Scottish Enterprise and the author of a recently published book, Carbon Choices. We have John Barry, Professor of Green Political Economy at Queen's University Belfast, and he's also co-chair of the Belfast Climate Commission. And representing the role of transformative technologies in water, we have Colm Hayden, the Chief Technology Officer at Aneco, and Kieran Nysel, Head of Business Analytics at Northern Ireland Water. And to get the discussion underway, it's my pleasure to welcome Simon Hamilton as our panel moderator. Simon has devoted his working life to making Belfast and Northern Ireland a great place to live, to visit and to do business, first in the world of politics and now as the CEO of Belfast Chamber of Commerce and Trade and one of the city's climate commissioners. So Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm delighted to be able to be here this afternoon, and thank you too for the invitation to chair this panel discussion. Over the course of the next half an hour, we're going to explore some of the themes that Alistair touched on in his excellent presentation. I'm going to do that with the help of the expert panel that you have just introduced, Beverly. I'm not going to reintroduce everybody. I'll let each of them maybe tell us a little bit more about who they are and what they do as they answer some of the questions. We want you to be involved in the session. There is a Q&A function. You should see it on certainly it's on the right-hand side of my screen. It should be the same location for you if you have any questions following on from what Alistair said or anything that the panelists say. Please put your question in there, and we'll do our very, very best to answer as many as we can in the time that is available. I'm going to start with Alistair's colleague, Kieran, who he mentioned in his presentation. So, Kieran, water and data analytics might seem like a bit of an odd combination, certainly do to me, not instinctively the sort of first thing you think about when you think of Northern Ireland water, but Alistair called digital technology the critical enabler for the organisation. So how have you helped to develop Northern Ireland Water's analytics strategy, and how is it, maybe you could set out a few examples as to how it's benefiting the business?
Yes, so Simon, thanks, and hello to everyone. So great to get the opportunity to speak at this event. So, as Alistair mentioned, as a water company, we've an enormous asset set, So, a lot of us, before I worked in the water industry about 11, 12 years ago, I just didn't really appreciate the scale of the organization, from taking water, having to move it to treatment works, then put that out onto the network, deliver it to people's homes, and then the reverse, the maybe less glamorous side of the business, the wastewater, transporting that waste and returning it back to the environment. And a number of our sites, almost all the sites, they are remote and they're not fully manned. So in order to manage that effectively, there's enormous data sets that we have sitting in the background, and there's a lot of value. If you looked across the water sector, and a lot of organizations would say that they're very data rich and sometimes information poor. So, our strategy has really been around, there's a few areas that I'd really like to talk about. So, the strategy, the development of the strategy, some of the data systems that we have, the whole people aspect of it, and then finally the tools, which weirdly for me, saying this is probably less important, and then how that informs next steps. So, when I look at the strategy, the analytics strategy is not necessarily an analytics strategy. It's about a business strategy. So it's feeding into some of those points that currently it just started off our PC21 business plan, and there's some, tough targets in there. We think we can make them, but there are both operational targets, CapEx targets are included in there. And, in order to meet those, you really have to look at some of the key challenges for the business. Climate is not lost on us. It's front and center of a lot of our conversations and meetings. Alistair had also mentioned about our wastewater constraints. So, years of, underfunding, and we have to look at every possible aspect that we can, alleviate some of those constraints. And some of those systems are digital systems. And we've a lot of data coming from our assets. But, if I move on to the sort of second area, so we've a lot of challenges in the business, so climate targets and, improving the performance of our business overall. So when I started to look at this with the wider teams, I started looking at our data sets and how we connected those to some of those challenges. So as an organization, we have around about 320 terabytes of data. Now that's not picture data, that is, numbers, ones and zeros sitting out there. And there's multiple data sets, and I've been fortunate enough to work on a number of those data sets with some of the great people around the business. And, so for example, we've customer data. So as an example, some of the tools we have, I've customer data on my phone from 15 minutes ago. That helps us respond to events because we're very much customer-facing organization. We have a lot of energy data over the last few years. Alistair and I have talked about this, and we've worked to automate the data. And some of our sites now, we've data coming in every minute from an energy perspective. We've all the work that's carried out in the system. We've chemical information, we've finance information. I mean, if you look at our finance data set, we've something like 2.5 million rows of data every year. And we've asset performance and then the live telemetry data that helps us manage this. So what we've looked at is how we've combined the data that we have and combine those with some of the challenges that we have. So things like asset optimization, how we can look at an asset and how that can be treated not just as an asset, but how it interacts with the energy system. And that's a lot of the work Alistair's been pushing on us over the last few years. So it's not just, okay, pumps will have to deliver water and move wastewater, but there's, you can look at time of day, you can look at how the customers are needing that water supply, and then you can decide how you can play around at the most efficient times for us, and then push some of that energy usage out into the areas that Alistair talked about, when the renewable times, through, at night where some of the wind power isn't been fully used because there's no user of that. So it's to try and leverage some of that data together. And then some of that data then feeds into some of our capital planning. So as an asset running, can we optimize it further, or do we need to invest? And that's about that balance that Alistair mentioned around the, our wastewater constraints. And then if I look at a key, final few areas, so, really important, the whole people piece is just so key, and it's funny when you're talking about a lot of technology, but the people piece is just so key to this. And I think in order for us to be successful in the way we've gone is we're trying to build a community model around the Northern Ireland water business. And that's, we have some experts that are outside, my own team with some really strong experts in the areas of finance, GIS, the ICT team, and we draw upon that, and we've really good relationships. And it's important we build that relationship and keep that. But from a people perspective, it's really important that we've, executive level support. So that's your stakeholders and buy-in from the very senior level. And then when we start to work with the business, I mean, there's a lot of analysis I can do that may not be practical. So it's working very, very closely with the domain experts. So these are the folks in the business that have 20, 30 years experience in water and wastewater, and then building those solutions and then working to build delivery plans so people can see the benefits aligning to their targets. And then finally, just a few points. The tools then they're important. So it doesn't really matter if you use Amazon Web Services or the whole Azure space or tools such as Tableau or whatever, but the tools are really there to help you maybe combine the data, automate and visualize it so people can make decisions. And then as Alistair jumps onto some of the further ambitions within the company, that allows us to take some of the next steps. So looking at things like, how are we going to operate our intelligent operations center? It's not just about customer service. It's about how do we optimize that customer service. So everyone in the country gets water, but how do we deliver that at the lowest possible cost with the least impact on the environment at all stages of the process? And then feeding into areas that I didn't think we would be looking at this soon. So things like the hydrogen and the whole thing around the energy market, how we can play in and out of that energy market, and then the circular economy. So I think for us, there's so many opportunities, but it's been keeping the strategy, the analytic strategy, very the strategy for the business, and then getting the people together to make sure that we deliver on it.
Good. I think that's a good point. It's not necessarily just a data analytics strategy. It's an enabler for the whole business. It's not something separate. And that leads neatly then to Colm and Colm and Eco. I mean, I know Eco and lots of others will know it as a leading data analytics firm in the city here, led by Dennis Murphy, who's a great pioneer in helping establish Belfast as a tech city. How are you and your team? How much do you think data is critical to our move towards net zero, and not just in terms of Northern Ireland Water? Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how how the business is helping Northern Ireland Water on its journey, but how in other ways do you see data and analysing that data helping other businesses as well?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. I'm CTO at Eco. We're a data optimization company. So our vision really is to inform decisions and enable services that deliver environmental and societal benefit. And how we're doing that is by helping teams within NI Water and other departments to analyze these masses of information that's available. And to achieve against net zero goals, data is critical because what gets measured gets done, it gets managed. And so there is a huge volume, as Kieran articulated, that spans a very complicated water delivery and treatment network and all of the fleet and the property that they manage. So that analytics needs to be managed. Across the UK, the Energy Data Task Force a year ago published a report, a strategy for a modern digitalized energy system. And one of its 5 main recommendations was data visibility. So what Eco does is to work within the organization alongside Kieran, his team, and those domain specialists to enable and surface that visibility internally. And then we collaborate with other parties regionally to help share and make that interoperable so that from a Northern Ireland perspective, we can join up. I think that at the moment, the Department for the Economy has an open consultation currently on Northern Ireland's energy strategy. So as citizens of Northern Ireland, we should all be voicing our opinion and our support of that. But that data visibility is critical to one of the key goals in that strategy, which is doing more for less. So on one side, Alistair describes these innovative, creative solutions that can work across different sectors collaborating. And we are at that perfect size in Northern Ireland that a few major departments can work together. Because if you pull together water, health, transport, the power consumption, and the opportunity for decarbonisation, and carbon control across there is huge. And we can do that with just a few organizations working together. Here with NI Water, we work right across a range of projects at the moment. They're from analysing the pumping network to look at energy consumption, looking at the asset performance. There's a huge amount of data in any project that needs to be, or any organization needs to be rationalized and harmonized and surfaced to those experts. So it's not an easy task, but it has to be done from the ground up, and it has to be driven from the top down with that leadership. And I think that that's a key opportunity. So whether it's looking at the fleets, the management, the pumping, or all of that energy consumption, leakage analysis, these are all areas where power and energy can be optimized through a greater understanding. And that really, requires the data services that Eco provides to help Kieran and his team.
Thanks, Colm. In our introduction of John, Beverly mentioned that he's a co-chair of the Belfast Climate Commission. It's usually John's job to keep me and other commissioners in line. I'm a little bit worried he might try to get his own back this afternoon. But John, the pursuit of net zero is something that vast majority of people welcome, subscribe to, think it's a good idea, whatever way you want to characterize it. But there are challenges and difficulties and problems with it as well. Perhaps that's something you could maybe explore for us, and also within that, the worry that some people have that this could be difficult or damaging even for some aspects of our economy, and how actually with time and transition and they're doing things in a particular way, actually it might be a benefit to our economy. Maybe that's something you could touch on as well.
Yeah, that's great, Simon, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Alistair, for your, I think, very inspiring presentation. Just to sound, in a way, it's part of my job. I almost like to be the teetotaler at the party as an academic. We're always pointing out some of the issues to be concerned about and the flaws, perhaps. But the net zero concept, I think, is a good start, but it's not risk-free, because the net zero concept is not about decarbonisation. I think we too often confuse both of those. It enables the continuing use of fossil fuels, but balance it by negative emissions technologies that will then essentially suck carbon out of the atmosphere. And I do think we do need technological innovation, but I am concerned, and just to give you an example, which came out last week, where the International Energy Agency, in its net zero report for the globe, it was very clear that the technologies that are required to get to net zero from 2030 to 2050 aren't invented yet, but that's part of their modeling in terms of getting to net zero. So it's just to sound a note of caution that I actually think we need to see net zero as a first step in the right direction, but we really should be getting to absolute zero. We should be decarbonizing our economies, and that really we should be doing due diligence around a kind of plug and play version of the future that we're simply going to, biofuel the Hummer, as it were. We simply take out the carbon energy and we stick in renewables, which I think is a very appealing concept, but I don't think the science backs it up, not least for some of the reasons that Simon had mentioned in terms of the job creation potential. I mean, one issue which I think has been hinted at in terms of what Alistair was saying is the idea of a just transition. The focus that Kieran and himself had mentioned about, cost reduction and so on, I think is really, really important, not just for businesses, but also that our citizens can benefit from this. But I do think we have to recognize that there will be parts of our economy that will not be viable in the future. And the just transition idea, it kind of gets us beyond that kind of naive, simplistic, but very politically attractive win-win-win. It is about recognizing that parts of the carbon economy simply have to go. They are simply incompatible with the science of trying to get to, the Paris agreements of keeping global average temperatures below 1.5 and definitely below 2%. But if I could just make some comments in terms of perhaps more positive reactions, as somebody who's been at this game for over 30 years, what Alistair presented to me has been the first evidence that an aspect of Northern Irish public sector has responded accordingly to the climate emergency. In case folks that didn't know, 3/4 of UK local councils have declared climate emergencies. The Northern Ireland Assembly declared one last February. Belfast City Council has done the same. But yet we as citizens have not seen any action in terms that would match that declaration of an emergency. In many respects, as an aside, the pandemic is what an emergency looks like. That's what you do in an emergency. But what Alistair has outlined is a very bold vision, which I think I really like, because the world we're now entering, folks, is a world of large-scale infrastructural transformation. And the language in which I was reading what Alistair was saying is a language of integration, certainly a language of bringing together digital and data, and we're going to need that. But it's also with the language of systems. So just to point out one other way of reflecting back what Alistair has said, how can the water system integrate with the energy system and then integrate with the transportation system? I would also say, speaking with my Belfast Climate Commission hat on, and also Simon as a commissioner, the research we've done for Belfast is I think there's a housing opportunity here as well. We have the highest rates of fuel poverty in Europe in Northern Ireland. And our biggest carbon hit in the city of Belfast is domestic space heating, because we're so heavily reliant on oil and we've really badly insulated houses. I think hydrogen, green produced hydrogen that Alistair had mentioned, which yes, certainly could fuel TransLink and even heavy goods vehicles and trains, for example, or other the hydrogen is not really appropriate for cars, but certainly for heavy goods vehicles. But one of the advantages, not just of being small, as Alistair said, but actually being rather slow to move to get the gas networks in, is that because of the high quality of the gas networks in Northern Ireland, it's able to take a much higher proportion of green hydrogen and biomethane. So there are other advantages in terms of bringing green hydrogen to domestic settings as well as housing, and also transportation. So I do think that what Alistair has pointed out is the era we're now entering into of innovation, of the need to not just move fast, but actually at scale. And that's one of the advantages we have because, in this case, just to finish, maybe small is beautiful.
Thank you, John. We're very fortunate, very lucky to be joined by Neil Kitchen. Neil is, and one of the benefits of operating in this format is we don't have to send Neil on a plane to bring him from Scotland to Belfast and contribute to the problem in the process. So Neil, you're very welcome, albeit virtually. Neil, can you maybe, from your Scottish enterprise perspective, maybe you could tell us what Scottish Water is doing in this field and how that compares with what Alistair set out and Kieran set out in terms of what Northern Ireland Water are doing, and also, are there any companies or projects in Scotland that are also similarly using digital technology to manage water more efficiently?
Yes, thank you, Simon. So just yes, I'm the work at Scottish Enterprise in the low carbon team, and I specifically work on low carbon heat and also water technologies. So my aim is to support the business environment for innovation and to help companies in that area. But yes, Scottish Water, a lot of similarities. So it was very interesting listening to Alistair because obviously Scottish Water are trying to do many of the same things. And I know they have feasibility studies around hydrogen, although I don't think any of them yet have gone to full-scale production. But just looking kind of from in England and Wales, all the water utilities have set net zero targets for 2030. Now, Scottish Water has set a net zero target for 2040, which on the face of it doesn't sound as good. But it's very different because the Scottish Water target includes much more than the operational emissions. It also includes the entire supply chain and capital construction program. So actually setting a net zero target for 2040 is extremely ambitious. And to get them on that track, I mean, it's a journey. They've developed a new carbon accounting tool, which takes account of emissions from capital projects. They have a new metric, the carbon intensity of investment, which they estimate is around 250 tonnes per £1 million of expenditure. So yeah, a lot of work going to be required, and it's going to impact on all future tendering and contracts. So it's going to filter down through the supply chain. So Scottish Water have hosted a huge number of wind farms because they go on a lot of land. So that obviously contributes to their targets. But they're also installing a lot of renewables that they own themselves. So a lot of solar panels are going up, even in relatively non-sunny Scotland. But John, you mentioned heat, because heat's going to be the big difficulty, the big area to decarbonise. And Scottish Water have two operational projects that I think are worth noting. One is taking heat using a water source heat pump from a sewer pipe that runs through Galashiels, and that is now heating Galashiels College. And I think that was the first of that type in the United Kingdom. And then more recently, similar but subtly different, taking heat out of the sewage pipe as it approaches the sewage outfall at Stirling. And there's been a district heating network developed out of that, and that's heating a local swimming pool, ice rink, cooling the ice rink, the schools, and also some housing. So we think there's great potential to do more of these projects. And then thinking beyond that, just wanted to mention a couple of companies in Scotland that are working in this digital space. So Booth Welsh, based in Irvine, so not too far away from Northern Ireland. They're a traditional engineering company, but they've recently gone down the digital route. So they use artificial intelligence and augmented reality to help people with their remote training and also remote inspections of pipe work. And they started doing that in the pharma industry and the food and drink industry, but are now doing that in the water utilities too. And then Scottish Water itself has been working on two separate but connected projects, one with Atkins and one with Capgemini. And that's all about new housing connections to the water and sewage supply. That used to be a paper-based system, and then it was replaced by sending lots of paper around by email. But that's been revolutionized. It's all computerized now. Housing developers can input data through iPads. It goes straight to Scottish Water, who can check the designs almost instantly. And if there's any queries, they can respond. And then housing developers can make any minor amendments required. And then going even further, the housing developers can take photographs, upload them to the system, and that allows Scottish Water to do remote inspections, which saves a lot of car journeys that previously were undertaken by inspectors. So it's just a great example. It's faster, it increases compliance, it increases the quality of the work done. It's all done at lower cost, and there's fewer errors and less travel. So I think that's a great example of where digital solutions are really necessary to help towards a net zero journey for water.
Still an opportunity if anybody wants to put a question to enter it into the question and answer function. I think that there's probably time for me just to quickly go around everybody again and go back to you, Kieran. And I think one of the things that it's very, very clear is that this is requiring a bit of a almost sort of cultural change. There's a huge change required for society at large, but as an organisation, Northern Ireland Water is having to go through a big culture change here. There were times whenever Alistair was talking, he was talking about the electricity grid so much I had to remind myself that you work for Northern Ireland Water and it was a water company, and it was just and that John talked about that integration of infrastructure. So is this something that obviously sounds like something that this is something that the organisation is embracing, and even just isn't so much embracing just because it has to, but is actually wanting to lead on?
Yeah, so I mean, Simon, when I started looking at the analytics strategy, so Alistair's vision was starting to feed into that. So I report under Alistair, and my background would have been looking at the performance of our internal assets. That's something that I've done before, looking at performance and customer space, how assets operate. So and looking at what our sort of standard internal management reporting would look like. But then you start to flip it in your head, Simon, and then you're starting, Alistair saying things to me and I'm going, can you say that probably one more time? We're starting to look at how we interact with the energy market. And then even things about looking at that are even further out into the circular economy. Should we put a greenhouse on the exit of one of our wastewater treatment works? And as Neil had mentioned, there's heat there. So that's value. So we're now starting to look, I think, from an organization to look at, okay, we do call them assets, but I don't always think we thought of them as assets as such. They were something we operated, but now it's moving that agenda. And hang on a minute, this thing actually has value in the whole value stream from start to finish. In our organization. So that to me was actually a big mindset change. Thinking, hang on a minute, this is more than a water company. And I think for us as well, there's been one of the key things, working with some of the teams. So Sean McCauley's on here today from our team as well. And, one of the things Sean's very keen and, really, really pushes on, we always need to make sure that we have a strong internal customer when we go to do something. So there has to be a demand. We could spend a lot of time modeling a lot of our information and putting all the systems in place. So we will do that as we need to, and we have a strategy that we move forward towards. But I mean, there's a lot of performance statistics, even Simon, over the last number of years that we've gone back, and it's a bit of a, hang on a minute, what are you telling me? This can't be correct, or we don't understand why this is. And to me, to be honest, Simon, it's not, and I probably shouldn't say this as head of analytics, it's no longer really a technology problem or challenge for us. It's getting the people on board and understanding that there's much more to this than we operate a water company, we've got targets, we've got to meet them, but there's something bigger out there for us, So I think that's one of the big changes that I'm certainly seeing.
Thanks, Kieran. The idea of Northern Ireland Water opening greenhouses now, I've got a sort of an image of you and Alistair now down at St George's Market or something with a stall every weekend, so you never know.
Don't give them that idea.
So, John, one of the things that struck me about Alistair's presentation too is this kind of, we could be world leading, and I think there's a sense that we are a small place, as said repeatedly, and that makes it maybe feel a bit insignificant in which is a global challenge in terms of climate change. So, do you agree with Alistair in terms of that view that we could be world leading, we could be world class in decarbonising society and beyond water? What other opportunities do you think there are for us to lead the way?
No, absolutely. I mean, it partly reflects the issue of scale, where small is beautiful, where particularly in a place like Northern Ireland, integrated as we are in a single electricity market with an interconnector to Scotland, we can be a hub of innovation in terms of that social behavioural piece that we have touched upon. But also, let's not forget that Northern Ireland almost achieved 50% of electricity produced from mostly offshore and onshore wind recently. It has a long and proud tradition in innovative engineering, whether it's Shorts, Mackey's, Massey Ferguson, Harry Ferguson, and so on. That, I think there's a great story here. And again, just to move outside the pure kind of technical policy realm and to do with politics, the dark side that both Simon and I are still recovering from. Is there not in this transition a shared vision? Because often what's missing, certainly in Northern Ireland, in my experience, has been a shared vision. Whereas this issue we're talking about is something that I think can be an inspiring perspective in terms of Northern Ireland. So in other words, it has an extra benefit simply beyond decarbonisation and addressing the climate emergency. Because the thing is, I see it every year as an educator. We have some of the most motivated and engaged student body, and it pains me when they have to leave because there's no jobs here. So for me, a plea in all of this is that let's foreground the job-rich creation opportunities in this. And I would say, let's not talk about growth. Growth is a very abstract idea. I'm sorry, I'm kind of flagging up and anticipating the talk I'm giving tomorrow of maybe the need for us to move beyond growth. But I do think we need to focus on jobs, not least in the whole building back better out of the pandemic. That's what our communities are crying out for, is jobs. And we have demonstrable evidence. And I'm just doing a piece of work for UK 100 as part of the Place-Based Climate Action Network, where we're looking at the economic multipliers from green jobs. And they're quite staggering, just even in terms of the economic return from planting individual trees. For example, the whole rich area of nature-based solutions, which again, Northern Ireland, because we're relatively underpopulated, us re-wetting bogs, for example, we have ample opportunity, particularly for our farming communities, to grow more trees, to rehabilitate biodiversity, because let's not forget, it's not just a climate crisis we're facing, it's a biodiversity crisis. The Earth is now experiencing a 6th great mass extinction event. And I think Northern Ireland has the capacity, the potential, if only the folks on the Hill could get their arses into gear, to forgive my French, in terms of moving on this. They declared an emergency, but I can, as I say, I can say in Alistair's contribution, that's the only part of the public sector I've seen responding to that. So well done, sir. Hats off to you, and continue as you are.
Colm, John mentioned jobs a lot there, and I think that is an important message to get across, that this is, there are going to be challenges ahead as a result of climate change and decarbonising or moving towards a low carbon economy. But obviously, NECO are already working in this space. Do you see? And we've seen over the last year, which has been a very difficult time for many sectors of the local economy, that technology has continued to do well. Belfast excels in that space. Do you see opportunities, not obviously for the business, but for the sector as a whole? And do you think Belfast, Northern Ireland can be at the centre of that?
Absolutely. During, as you described, the challenging past 18 months, we've grown, a lot of the technology companies have grown, and that's a shift towards the data-driven changes that are happening here. And they're essential to bringing together our regional collaboration. I think, I sat on some AI Council discussions and reviews, and while there may be a vision about artificial intelligence, just getting data together is something that's key and critical. And there's a lot of skills that can be transferred for subject matter experts learning a little bit more and being enabled in their domains to apply that. And I commend what NI Water are doing internally in using the power of data storytelling to sell this vision. And I think at a regional level, that's where we need to lift it up, because some of the other approaches I've seen have kind of build a data catalog and they will come. Whereas here, I think we need to build the vision and the story and communicate that both to our citizens, but also from the executive down. And that will create growth in the economy, because we have shown we can innovate, and by our collaboration, we can bring together those sectors to drive growth for all.
Thanks, Colin. Last word then to you, Neil. Beverly mentioned that you had just recently written a book, available in all good bookshops, I'm sure. And contact you if you can't find one. I'm sure you could help out. It's called Carbon Choices, and we've talked a lot here, understandably, given the subject matter of Alistair's lecture on what big institutions like Northern Ireland Water can do. We've talked about what businesses can do, but your book touches on also what individuals can do, and we all have to play our part and make our own contribution, and build from the bottom up as well. What are the sort of themes that are coming through in that book you've just penned, in terms of what individuals can contribute in a practical and meaningful way?
My book gives lots of advice for governments, for businesses, and for individuals, but focusing on water, which, albeit it's a very small part of the book. If you wanted to reduce your personal water footprint, you could go out and buy water efficient appliances such as dishwashers, washing machines. You could invest in a Joe Flush toilet to reduce water there. But if you look at the bigger picture, our water footprint is much more about what we consume. So an average t-shirt requires about 3,000 litres of water to manufacture. And a lot of that's from the cotton that's usually grown in countries that already face a water shortage. If you look at the Caspian Sea in Russia, it's more or less dried up because of irrigation to grow cotton. So just think about, all the knock-on impacts of you buying a t-shirt that you might wear once or twice and then throw out. It's you really ought to be buying for the long term and reusing their clothes and then recycling at the end of their lives. And then an even more amazing example, I'm not sure who calculated this, but the calculation is that for a kilogram of beef, you require 15,000 litres of water. So that's an awful lot of water for not a lot of food. And I just did a rough calculation that's equivalent to about 2,500 flushes of your toilet. So you're using as much water by eating beef, albeit quite a bit of beef, as you might use in a year for flushing your toilet. So my message is really to think about your diet, think about where your food's coming from. Avocados is another one that's notorious for its heavy water usage. And yeah, there's a lot more to to water footprinting than just turning the tap, drinking, and think more widely.
Thank you, Neil. I'm always thinking about my diet. Avocados, easy to keep out of the diet. Beef, not so much, because in this part of the world, as in Scotland, we produce some very, very good beef. So I'll just make that plug for the industry there. So thank you for Thank you for that, Neil. And I kind of thank everybody for their participation this afternoon. Some really, really interesting topics touched on there, following on from Alistair's fascinating lecture. Thank you all. Thank you, Kieran, Colin, John, and Neil, for your time and for taking part and for helping us to explore some of those issues that Alistair raised so excellently earlier on. So it's a pleasure to hand back to Beverly now. Thank you very much.
That's Simon.
Yes, thank you, Simon, and to all the panel, Neil, Kieran, Colm, and John. Thought it was really interesting for so many varied insights on the pursuit of net zero, and not just at a government or public sector level, but some of the things that we can do ourselves to move forward in a more meaningful way. It's a multifaceted topic, so pleased to say the panel will be around for about 15 minutes or so and available to chat at the networking tables. We're ending in closing, special appreciation to our keynote speaker, Alistair Jinks, for sharing the positive and practical steps that are already underway at Northern Ireland Water to address the climate emergency. Big round of applause there. Personal thanks to Louise from Digital Leaders, keeping us all online today, to our hosts and Echo, but most of all to our attendees. Thank you very much. We really do appreciate your interest in this really important issue. One last thing, tomorrow the Northern Ireland flagship event is on. It focuses on regional collaboration around the grand challenges. It kicks off at 2 o'clock. We have really speakers, including John Barry, who asks us to imagine a truly green and resilient future. So if you haven't already, there's still time to register on the Digital Leaders site. And I think also Louise has dropped the link into the chat. So we hope to see many of you there. And yeah, we'll be around now for about 10 minutes or so in the networking lounge and look at the tables. Thank you very much, everybody.